Well, that certainly is an important seminar that they're getting ready to have. We are in a series that we're calling Conversations, Your Words Have Power. And today we're going to look at a specific place in our lives that we need to make sure we're having conversations and think about what kind of conversations we're having. And that is conversations with the family. I read the story of a young man that was standing before a judge because of his delinquent behavior. And the judge knew the boy's father, and he said to the young man, "Your father has written so many books about the law and responsibility." The judge looked at this young man and said, "What do you remember about your father?" And the young man said, what I remember is that my father is so busy writing and editing his books, he never has time to talk to me." You know, that's a conversation missed. In this series, Conversations, Your Words Have Matter, it is so important that we don't neglect to intentionally have conversations at home. Now, some of you may not be parents, but you have people that are near you, and those conversations that you have are very important. And what are we talking about? What is the topic of our conversation? Are we talking about important things, or are we missing those important things? So today I want to talk to you about what to say. Let's begin with this one. What to say to God. What do you say to God? Are you talking to God? One day, a religious leader came to Jesus, and he asked Jesus this simple question in Matthew 22, 36 to 40. "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." It's such an interesting statement and summary of what our focus needs to be. You're going to notice that Jesus does not recite to him all the things he shouldn't be doing. He says the most important thing for you to know is what you should be doing. You should be loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, your mind, your soul. Because God is a person, that's what the Bible tells us. He can relate to us as we relate to one another. And the way that you relate to someone is in a conversation. What we need to be focusing on is paying attention to God, listening to God, trusting God, following God, loving God, and then loving people. And the way that we do that is we do that by talking to God. Now, I get it. For many people, the idea of being close to God, relating to God, is abstract and seems a little bit beyond their reach. The way to overcome that is to treat God like a person. Let him into your life. Tell him about your struggles and your fears, your hopes and your dreams. How about every day beginning with an actual conversation with God? I've got a suggestion. How about for the next 7 days, every one of us wake up and we talk to God first. And we actually say, "God, I know you're there. I want to know you. And I want to tell you today that I love you. And I want to get better at loving you." What would happen if we began our day like that? A few years ago, honestly, my life was very much changed because I was reading through Genesis, and I came to a guy by the name of Enoch. And if you read in Genesis in the early chapters, it's the list of all the people that lived, had a child, they lived a little bit longer, and then they died. So the pattern is established in this particular chapter. I think it might be Genesis chapter 6. You'll have to look it up. But you finally get to Enoch, and it says that Enoch had a child, and that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, because God took him. And wow, that messed me up. I don't know what theological box to put that in. Enoch walked with God. He had such a real and close relationship with God that he didn't die. He's the only man in that whole chapter where it doesn't record that he died, but that God took him. Why? Because Enoch had a real relationship with God. It inspired me, and I thought, wow. I mean, if it's possible for a human being, a man, to walk with God, I'd love to try that. Like, I don't think I'm as good as Enoch, or nearly as good as any of the many characters in the Old Testament. But what I know about God is that God responds because of his grace and his goodness. Hebrews 11, 5-6 also became an important verse for me that kind of shaped my spiritual discipline of reading scripture and praying. Hebrews 11, 5-6 says this, by faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And that got my attention as well. Could it be possible that I could somehow, some way, at some times in my life, please God? Enoch pleased God. You and I can walk with God. You and I can please God. And it goes on to say, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So I get it. Praying to God every day, telling God you love him, asking God to teach you how to walk with him. It might seem awkward, abstract, kind of like, is this even real? But Hebrews says it is real, but it takes faith. And if you do this, God could show up in your life. So, the first important conversation you have every day, or don't have, is with God. Just believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently or earnestly seek him. Secondly, so what do you say to God? Secondly, what do you say about God? Because in your house, you're going to be talking. I hope you are. You should have conversations. Conversations are what connect us to the people in our household. Like, what are you going to say to your kids about God? Now, I get it. We should be talking about the Chiefs, right? Yeah, I got a good response. I can tell. You know, I was doing a wedding last week, so I didn't watch football, and I'm a pretty lame sports guy, I have to admit. I like to watch football when people are around me who want to watch football, but I don't often think about watching it or tracking the games unless somebody's around me. And nobody in my household, James and Cindy, they're not all about it. So, you know, I'm all by myself. And I was doing a wedding, and so I didn't watch the Chiefs. I'm interested. If my son was around, we would have watched that for sure. And then I began to see all of the social media reports that was quite an amazing game. So you know what I did? I went to the 17-minute highlight reel. And boy, that was amazing. And you know what? You should talk about what's going on in the sports world, don't you think? You should talk about what's going on in our nation. But what do you talk about when it comes to God? Is he such a part of your life that you think about mentioning him in conversation? I'm not talking about convincing people about God. I'm talking about an overflowing of the relationship you have with God that makes you think about God and his ways and what he has taught you. That's a conversation that we should be having in our families. I want to give you some talking points. These talking points, even as I reviewed them, blessed me once again. Here are some talking points. Number one, in your household, if you have kids, one thing that you need to be talking to them about is the fact that God made you. God made you. Turn to the person beside you and tell them, God made you. Did you forget that? He did. God made you. Actually, you are God's handiwork. You are His unique masterpiece. As a parent, your kids need to know that God made them and that they are one of a kind. They're not like everyone else. God does not compare them with everyone else. They do not need to feel like they are in competition with other people. God intentionally makes everyone different. He loves diversity. We are not mass-produced. We are individually crafted by the handiwork of God. Just think about it. Everyone in this room looks different, has a different story, a different personality, different aptitudes and talents. We're not the same. Just think about it. If everybody was the same, probably nobody would ever get married. You know why? Because you're just like me and I'm bored already, so forget it. You know what I'm saying? Some of you got married and you married someone. After you got married, you discovered, boy, they are so not like me, okay? And thus the adventure began. But God intentionally makes us different. Everybody has a different handprint, voice print, eye print. The whole idea of biosecurity is the fact that every person is absolutely different. Ephesians 2 and verse 10 says, for we are His workmanship. You know what that word also means? We are His masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus for good works. God created you as a masterpiece for some good works. You were born when you were born in this generation at this time because God uniquely crafted you to accomplish certain jobs. You're important to God. God intentionally prepared everything about you. I don't know about you, but this makes me encouraged. Doesn't it make you encouraged? God accepts you the way He made you. He wanted to be who you are. You are His masterpiece. God has a plan for your life. You are made very precisely to do what He designed you to do. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing. You can't be compared to your brother, your sister, and the people around you because that's not the way God works. God made you to be you. If you're a parent, it's so important that your kids understand that God is so incredible that He made you you. They are unique for a purpose. There are some parents that have the idea that I treat all of my kids the same. My goal is to be fair. Well, the problem with being fair is that every single one of the people in our family are different, and what works for one won't work for the other. The goal is not to be fair, it's to be wise. So you got to do things differently for different people in the family. The goal of the parent is to help kids accept their uniqueness and learn to relate to them for who they are. Your kids are born, and then you begin this process of discovering who they really are. Parents have to teach their kids. God's got a plan for your life. You and I need to remember that. See, when you have conversations about God, you also remind yourself, you're alive today because God's got a plan for you. You are who you are because God made you. There are some enemies to being who we are. The first one is comparison. Comparing ourselves to other people has become an Olympic sport that all of us are involved in. And you know what has fueled this? It's social media. Studies have shown. You know what social media does? You go out to eat, you take a picture of your beautiful dessert, right? And you post it. And everybody else is like, man, look at that beautiful meal they're having. I'm having peanut butter and jelly. I bet you didn't take a picture of that. We're constantly comparing ourselves to each other. We're comparing ourselves to millions of people on social media all the time. Either we make ourselves feel better, and that's pride, or we make ourselves feel worse, and that's destructive. Comparison is a problem. If you're a parent, the last thing you need to be saying is, why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like your sister? Why can't you be as smart or as athletic or whatever it is? And you know what the answer to that is? Because they were uniquely crafted by God. He made them who they are. 2 Corinthians 10:12. For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, they're just not wise. 1 Corinthians 10:31, this is the instruction. Therefore, whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. You know what that verse says to me? That says that my life actually matters because no matter what I'm doing, are you going to eat or drink today? Did you know that you can eat and drink today for the glory of God? Boy, that elevates the whole exercise of eating and drinking, doesn't it? Whatever you do, whatever the things you have to accomplish today, God says, I so value what you do. Do it to the glory of God, because I created you specifically the way you are to do what I've designed you to do. Man, that's a beautiful thing. Now, the other thing that is an enemy is conforming. This idea of conforming is the pressure to be like everybody else. I mean, I just love to watch fashion and hairstyles, don't you? Because if you wait long enough, when someone comes out with like a new hairstyle, you give it a few months and everybody's going to look that way too. You know? Whatever the fashion is. You know, James has noticed that his sisters wear ripped jeans. Now, by the way, for some of you in this room, they spend a lot of money on those ripped jeans. I've heard people say, what, you can't buy jeans that aren't ripped? I've even said, hey, I'll help you buy some new pants. But I'm so lame because I'm dad. James is so impressed by the ripped jean phenomena. He's been ripping his own jeans. He's cool. I mean, please, don't be a dork. Is that allowed to be said in church? I don't know. I mean, look like you belong to this century, please. But be careful that you don't get eaten up by the machine of this world that tells you you need to be like everybody else and you're not free to be who you are. Romans 12:1-2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Why? Because God made you precisely the way He made you, because He has jobs for you to do and things for you to accomplish. So present your bodies just the way you are into the hand of God. So whatever your hand finds to do, you can do it for the glory of God. You don't have to be like everyone else. Verse 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good, acceptable, and the perfect will of God. You know, one of the things that we have to overcome as parents is that when our children are born, we are predisposed to want our kids to be like us. You know what I'm saying? I mean, We want them to like the things we like, play the sports we like, do the things that we want them to do. Sometimes we as parents can get caught in the trap of, well, I want you to be like everybody else in your class. I mean, that's a problem for parents to deal with. We need to let our kids be who God made them to be and celebrate who they are and not put pressure on them to conform to everybody else. First thing is God made you. Those are things that should be talked about. Number two, God values you. God values you. As a parent, we need to affirm our kids. I mean, all of us need affirmation. Just like we need daily bread, we need daily affirmation. We have this deep hunger to be trusted, accepted, valued, and loved, and within the context of the family or even our friends and community. It's important that that's part of what we do. I heard the story of an older couple, and the wife asked her husband one day, "Honey, do you still love me?" To which he responded, "Listen, I told you when we got married, I do, and I love you. If I change my mind, I'll let you know." That's one unhappy couple because a wife needs to hear it restated all the time. I love you. We need affirmation. In my house, every time there's a birthday, we do this thing called words. I've told you this before. We go around the table and we say to the person who's celebrating a birthday, "Hey, you know what I really admire about you?" And then we say what we like. "Hey, you know, I noticed how you worked so hard in school and you overcame this." I mean, it's sweet and corny and life-changing all at the same time. And James will not allow us to have a birthday celebration without having words. And if you're at my house during that birthday meal, you're going to be roped into this thing. And I will make this speech. Oh, listen, don't feel like you need to say anything. But we're glad that you're here to join us for this moment. Now we're going to do our tradition. We're going to all give words of affirmation. At least once a year, right? Everybody who matters most to you in the family speaks out loud in a conversation what they admire about you, what they like about you. Rick Warren tells a story of a junior high boy that was in a sort of a special school, and this boy had come into that school with terrible anger management problems. He was hard to be with. He was hard to be around, and he had changed so much that they asked him to give the speech. And he got up and he gave the speech that went something like this. Listen to how beautiful this speech is for a junior high boy. He said, "My life was like a campfire, out of control. My life was sending sparks everywhere. My anger was burning everybody." And then he tells how his parents and his small group in church began to affirm him and accept him as he was. And these people started filling up his bucket of affirmation and love. And he ended his speech by saying, "I'm still a campfire, but now I warm everybody, and they're attracted to the fire, and they're making s'mores over me." Does everybody know what a s'more is? You do, okay. You know what? This is the transformation that can occur when we affirm. Matthew chapter 10, 29. Jesus says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin?" You know what he's saying? Man, 2 sparrows are worth almost nothing. 2 of them for a copper coin, not very valuable. But not one of them falls to the ground without your father's, apart from your father's will. But every hair on your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore. You are of more value than the sparrows. You know what God is saying? Every bird out there he pays attention to, how much more will he value you and pay attention to you? Psalm 139, one of my favorite passages, where it says that, you know what, when you were in your mother's womb, when you were made in secret, you were skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. He's talking about the womb. Your eyes saw my substance, yet being unformed. And in your book, they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when there was none of them. How precious are your thoughts to me, O God. You know what? Here's the deal. God values you because he made you. And then God values you because he sent his son to die for you. How much are you worth? How much are you valued? 1 Peter 1, 18 to 19. Knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver and gold, but from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. He came to save us. He paid to redeem us in the person of his Son. God made you, and God values you. What are the things we say about God in our conversations with our closest friends, our families, our children? There should be some of this spoken. It's so important. In the community of our church, we should love each other this way because we know that this person, they were created by God for God's purpose, and God watches over them and values them. Yes, that person that annoys you, God loves, and he's watching. Lastly, families need to be telling stories. They need to be telling stories. And I just want to say this, that if you read through the Bible, you know what you're going to discover? You're going to discover that almost every family in the Bible was a dysfunctional family. You know the first family, Adam and Eve had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. How dysfunctional were they? Well, the day came when Cain killed Abel. I mean, that's pretty dysfunctional, would you agree? You want to go on and look at the family of Abraham and then Isaac, and I don't have time to go, but boy, you talk about dysfunctional families, they're all there. Jesus, when he was preaching one day, his mother, his brothers came and they were trying to reach Jesus because they thought he was out of his mind. He was crazy. Let's go get him. Boy, what in the world happened to Jesus? So if you're here today and you think, boy, my family is a mess, I don't know if there's any redeeming quality about my family, I'm just going to say, hey, guess what? There is. God's dealt with dysfunctional families forever, and he's going to deal with you and your family. You just need to trust him and follow him and speak of him. This week, my daughter sent me a podcast that she does for her church. And in the podcast, she was talking about the Hallel. Now, the Hallel is a Jewish tradition where there's sort of like this call and response going on. And one of those Psalms is Psalm 136. Listen to some of the verses of Psalm 136. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Can you all say, for his mercy endures forever? Here we go. For his mercy endures forever. And that word mercy there, it's the word hesed. It's not just mercy, it is an expression of love, a complex word that talks about the undeserved kindness, the love and the mercy of God, kind of all wrapped up together. And so in this particular Psalm, Psalm 136, there was the call and the response. Let's practice a few verses, okay? I'm going to pause, and that's when you all need to say, his mercy endures forever. Here we go. Pause. Thank you. You're getting it. Now let's go. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Give thanks to the God of gods. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords. And some of you are saying, Pastor, wait a second. This is a Baptist church. We don't do this. Yeah, we do. We're doing it today. Let me just continue. You don't have to respond. To him who alone does great wonders, his mercy endures forever. To him who by wisdom made the heavens, his mercy endures forever. To him who laid out the earth with the waters, his mercy endures forever. To him who made great lights, his mercy endures forever. It goes down in verse 10. To him who struck Egypt in their firstborn, his mercy endures forever. It goes on, to him who divided the Red Sea in two, his mercy endures forever. And this whole psalm, this call and response, this Hallel, was a teaching tool, because you see, when the younger people came in and they recited his mercy endures forever, but they heard for the first time, what happened at the Red Sea? Then the parents would say, oh, let me tell you, this is what happened. Oh, when they delivered you from Egypt, what happened? And then they would tell the story. And so the narrative of their people was passed along in the conversations provoked by this Hallel. My daughter, in her podcast, she said, now, I didn't grow up in a tradition where we had this kind of a ritual, but I did grow up in a family that often rehearsed the stories of God's goodness and his deliverance and his provision. And then she tells the story of the time when they were all in school and we didn't have the money to send them to school. The tuition had to be paid. If they didn't get the tuition paid, they would ask them to leave the class. It would be an embarrassing moment. I went to my kids and I says, hey, listen, kids, I got to tell you. And this is Tiffany recounting one of the narratives of the family. Tiffany says that I remember my dad said we need to pray because we can't send you to school because we don't have the tuition. I remember the story this way. I'm asking the family to pray because I'm desperate. We need the money for tuition. And then in front of all my kids, as we're around the table, my wife says out loud, well, if we're going to pray for money for tuition, why don't we also ask God to provide money for school clothes? Because all of you have grown, and we need new school clothes for the new school year. And I remember in my spirit, in my heart, I'm thinking, Cindy, be quiet. Don't make this too hard for God. Isn't that silly? But of course, I couldn't do that in front of my kids. So I said, okay. Let's pray for tuition and school clothes. Later, I said to Cindy, why did you load it up, Cindy? Don't make this too hard. I want the kids to see God provide. I don't want them to see a failure. A few weeks later, I got a letter. A church, this is not the way you want to raise money, but a church had closed its doors and decided to divide up the remaining assets to the missionaries they had supported. And it was a lump sum. And it was enough money for tuition and school clothes. And my daughter's in her 30s. She might be 36, but I don't want to tell you that. She's in her 30s. And she still remembers the family narrative. And there are so many times when people were sick in the family and they got well. Times when we were being surrounded by men with guns, one of them pointing at my head, demanding the money, and we didn't know if we were going to live or die, and the Lord delivered us. Times when God helped us through difficult things, and when God did some amazingly unexpected good things. What are the narratives you're telling your children, your family, and your friends about God? And your children may say, oh yeah, we've heard that story before. Tell them again. Because conversations matter. and our words have power. You know, in conclusion, I started out the story of a judge asking a young man who was he was delinquent, and that's why he was before the judge. And the young man said, "My dad writes about the law and responsibility, but he doesn't talk to me." I want to end by just telling you about another man. His name was Jonathan Edwards. He lived in the 1700s. He might be one of the most intelligent people ever to be in the history of America. Jonathan Edwards wrote 26 volumes of commentary, letters, and books. It's called the Yale edition of the writings of Jonathan Edwards, over 16,000 pages. This guy, when he was 13, he went to Yale and graduated. He died at 54, and he was the president of Princeton University. Jonathan Edwards married a woman by the name of Sarah, and they had 11 children. This guy was a high-capacity leader. He was very busy. He did so many things. But you know what the story of Jonathan Edwards also is? Every day he came home, he spent the first hour with his kids, talking to them. And it goes on to say that Jonathan Edwards actually went around and put his hand on the head of his children, and he prayed over them and prayed a blessing over them every single day. Can you believe that? You know what that is? That's having the right conversation with the right people. A study was done to study the descendants of Jonathan Edwards 150 years after his death. And his legacy includes the following. Now, we don't know about everybody in his legacy, but I mean, I don't know that all of his descendants turned out great, but listen to this. One was a U.S. vice president. One was a dean of a law school. One was a dean of a medical school. 3 were U.S. senators. 3 were governors. 3 were mayors. 13 were college presidents. 30 were judges. 60 were doctors. 65 were professors. 75 were military officers. 80 were public office holders. 100 of them were lawyers. 100 of them were clergymen. And 285 were college graduates. We're talking in the 1700s. And the study was a study that focused on how parents raise their children and affect not only their generation, but up to 4 generations for either good or evil. Now, some of you may have children that have chosen to not follow what you've taught them. You've got to respect that God gives each one of us decisions to make. But you know what? It is a great thing as a parent to never give up, to always keep the conversation going, to keep the love moving in that direction. And that is what Jonathan Edwards did. Those conversations could far outlive you if you're intentional about them. You might say, well, I'm just not that kind of a person. I'm not someone who can have conversations like that. You know what I have to say? Get over it. Boy, that wasn't very loving, was it? Yes, it was. Start where you are. Be who you are. Speak the words that have power. Have the conversations that can affect the next generation. They are hungry to hear what you have to say, even when they look like they are bored out of their mind. I want to ask you to bow your heads if you would. Here's my challenge. Why don't you begin by having a conversation with God every single day for the next 7 days, without fail. See, I don't know what to say. Just get up and say this. God, I know that you're there. And if the greatest commandment is to love you, I want to start by just saying today, as best as I know how, I tell you I love you. And I'd like to know you. Maybe some of you have never accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior. You know, you need to start with that. Maybe right here in this room or while you're watching online, you would be willing to say, God in heaven, I want you in my life. I accept Jesus as my Savior. I ask you to forgive me of my sin, and I welcome you into my life. I want to know how to walk with you. I want to get to know you. I want to love you with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength. If you'll help me, I want to do this. And if you prayed that prayer today, we'd love to hear from you. Nick and I are going to be down here in the front. We'd love to pray with anyone who comes, who needs any kind of prayer support today. If you're online, if you'll text 94,000, the word prayed, we'd like to get in touch with you. Would you stand, please?